Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Streamline English. I'm so glad you are here. Take a breath, settle in. Tonight, I want to challenge something that many people assume. Most people think that being born a princess, born into a royal family, with wealth and power and privilege, means a life of safety, of ease, of protection. Elizabeth Tudor was a princess, and she was declared illegitimate, not a real princess, without rights or legitimacy, before she was even 3 years old. Her mother was arrested and executed when Elizabeth was 2 years and 8 months old. She grew up in a world where her birth and her identity were disputed, where the wrong political turn could mean her death, where she was watched, suspected, imprisoned, and threatened for most of her early life. She survived all of it. And then, at the age of 25, she became Queen of England. She ruled for 44 years, one of the longest and most remarkable reigns in English history. Under her rule, England became a major European power. Its literature and arts flourished, and the outlines of a world-spanning empire began to take shape. She never married. She had no children. She stood alone, and she held. This is the story of Queen Elizabeth I, the daughter who was declared illegitimate and became England's greatest queen. If you enjoy calm, powerful, true stories like this one, please subscribe to Streamline English. A new story every week, told slowly and clearly. Thank you, my friend. Elizabeth Tudor was born on September 7, 1533, at Greenwich Palace, outside London. Her father was King Henry VIII of England, perhaps the most famous king England ever produced, and certainly one of the most dangerous to be close to. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom Henry VIII had famously broken with the Catholic Church and created the Church of England so that he could dissolve his first marriage and marry Anne instead. Anne was beautiful, intelligent, and politically gifted. She had held the king's obsessive attention for years. She had borne him a daughter, Elizabeth. But Henry wanted a son. England's succession was everything, and in the brutal arithmetic of Tudor succession, a daughter was a disappointment, and a son was a necessity. When Anne failed to produce a male heir and suffered a miscarriage in 1536 that appeared to be a son, Henry moved against her. Anne Boleyn was arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and treason. The charges were almost certainly fabricated, manufactured by Henry's advisors to give the king a way out of his marriage. She was tried before a court that was never going to acquit her, found guilty, and beheaded on May 19, 1536, on Tower Green within the Tower of London. Elizabeth was 2 years and 8 months old. Before Anne's execution, Henry had the marriage to Anne declared invalid, meaning Elizabeth, too, was declared illegitimate. No longer a princess, but a bastard, the king's daughter, by a marriage that was now legally declared never to have happened. Illegitimate, in this context, born of parents whose marriage is not legally recognized, historically considered to have fewer legal rights than children of recognized marriages. Elizabeth was 2 years old, and already her world had been defined by violence, betrayal, and the cruelest kind of political calculation. Growing up as the daughter of Henry VIII was, to say the least, complicated. Henry married 6 times. His children from different marriages had different statuses at different times. Edward, Henry's son by his third wife, Jane Seymour, was the male heir, the future king. Mary, Henry's daughter by his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had her own claim and her own following. Elizabeth was third, younger, her parentage tainted by the scandal of Anne Boleyn, and yet Henry did not discard her entirely. She was, after all, his daughter. She was kept at court, received an education, and was restored to the line of succession by the Third Succession Act of 1544, behind Edward and Mary. The education she received was exceptional for any person of that era, and remarkable for a woman. She was taught by some of the finest scholars in England, learning Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and Spanish. She read classical literature and philosophy. She wrote, composed music, and debated. By the time she was a teenager, she was one of the most educated people in the kingdom, male or female. Succession, the process by which a title, position, or throne passes from one person to the next. When Henry VI died in 1547, Edward, then only 9 years old, became King Edward VI. He died in 1553, at the age of 15, almost certainly of tuberculosis. Mary, the eldest of Henry's daughters, became Queen Mary I. Elizabeth's position was now more dangerous than ever. Queen Mary I was a devout Catholic. She reversed the religious reforms of her father and her brother, reimposing Catholicism in England, and beginning what would become known as the Marian persecutions, the burning of Protestants who refused to convert, which earned her the sobriquet Bloody Mary. Sobriquet, a nickname, often an unflattering one. Elizabeth, raised Protestant, was under immediate suspicion. She walked a careful, delicate political line, attending Catholic Mass when required, presenting herself as obedient to her sister's will, while carefully not renouncing her own beliefs in any way that could be held against her later. In 1554, when the Protestant Wyatt Rebellion erupted against Mary's plan to marry the Catholic King Philip II of Spain, Elizabeth was arrested. She had no known connection to the rebellion, but suspicion was enough to land her in the Tower of London, the same fortress where her mother had been imprisoned before execution. She was 20 years old and terrified. Entering the tower, she allegedly sat on the steps in the rain before going in, saying she had not deserved to be brought there. She asked to be allowed to write to the Queen, her sister. She wrote a careful, precise letter, arguing for her innocence. Mary could not find sufficient evidence to try Elizabeth. After nearly 2 months in the Tower, and further months under house arrest, Elizabeth was released. She had survived, but she knew the lesson. In Tudor England, survival required intelligence, patience, and control of every word, every expression, every gesture. She learned those lessons completely. On November 17, 1558, Queen Mary I died, at the age of 42, probably of influenza or uterine or ovarian cancer. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain had produced no children. Her reign had ended in frustration and the burning of nearly 300 Protestant men and women. Elizabeth, 25 years old, was queen. The situation she inherited was grim. England was financially weak. It had just lost Calais, its last territory in France, to the French. The country was religiously divided, still raw from Mary's persecutions. Catholic powers in Europe, Spain and France, the two dominant powers of the era, viewed the Protestant daughter of Anne Boleyn with deep hostility. Elizabeth moved carefully and brilliantly. She chose her advisors with great care, most notably William Cecil, a brilliant administrator who would serve her as chief minister for 40 years. She addressed religion with relative moderation, establishing a Protestant Church of England that was broad enough to accommodate many former Catholics without requiring them to renounce too much. The Elizabethan settlement, as it became known, was a careful political compromise designed to reduce religious conflict. She never married. Repeatedly, throughout her reign, she used the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool, dangling the prospect of an alliance to European monarchs and suitors, never committing. She was shrewd enough to understand that marriage meant sharing power, and she was not inclined to share power. She styled herself the Virgin Queen, married to her kingdom, and this image became part of the powerful mythology she carefully constructed around herself. The Elizabethan era, roughly the last half of the 16th century, is remembered in England as a golden age of literature, exploration, and national confidence. William Shakespeare began his career during Elizabeth's reign. Christopher Marlowe wrote his great plays. Edmund Spenser wrote The Faerie Queen, a great poem dedicated to the Queen herself. The era produced an extraordinary flowering of English literature, drama, and poetry. English explorers, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, Martin Frobisher, sailed to the furthest reaches of the globe. Drake circumnavigated the world in 1577 to 1580, returning with enormous plunder from Spanish ships and territories. The first English attempts to establish colonies in the Americas, including the ill-fated Roanoke colony in what is now North Carolina, occurred under Elizabeth's reign, planting the seeds of what would eventually become the British Empire. Circumnavigate, to travel all the way around something, especially the world, by ship or aircraft. Elizabeth herself was a formidable political operator. She presided over her court with intelligence and theater, dressing in spectacular gowns, projecting power and authority through the physical performance of queenship, while managing the complex and competitive world of Elizabethan court politics with remarkable skill. She could be charming, and she could be cold. She was not above deception. She played the long game in everything. Her relationship with Mary, Queen of Scots, her Catholic cousin, who had a claim on the English throne, and whose presence in England for 19 years as a prisoner created a constant security threat, was one of the most delicate and ultimately tragic situations of her reign. Elizabeth delayed, hesitated, and finally signed Mary's death warrant in 1587, only to claim afterward that she had not really meant it to be executed. History did not entirely believe her, but history also accepted that she did what she had to do. In 1588, the confrontation that had been building for decades finally arrived. Philip II of Spain, Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, a devout Catholic, the most powerful monarch in the world, assembled the most powerful naval fleet Europe had seen, the Spanish Armada. Its purpose was to transport a Spanish army from the Spanish Netherlands across the English Channel and invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholic rule. The Armada consisted of approximately 130 ships and was carrying around 18,000 soldiers. Elizabeth's naval forces were smaller and more agile. Her admiral, Lord Howard, and the vice admiral, Francis Drake, knew English waters far better than the Spanish did. The famous naval engagements in the English Channel, combined with severe storms, which the English called a Protestant wind, scattered and wrecked the Spanish fleet. Of the 130 ships that set out, perhaps 67 returned to Spain. Thousands of Spanish sailors and soldiers died. Many drowned in storms off the coast of Ireland. Before the battle, with the Spanish fleet already in sight of England and her troops massed at Tilbury to defend the coast, Elizabeth delivered one of the most famous speeches in English history. She told her soldiers that she knew she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, but she had the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too. She said she would live or die among them, to lay down her honor and her blood, even in the dust, for God, her kingdom, and her people. The speech was a performance, a piece of political theater, but it was also, by all accounts, genuinely stirring. The queen, who had always maintained careful control of her image, showed, in that moment, something more visceral and real. England defeated the Armada. The threat of invasion passed. Visceral, coming from deep inside the body or emotions, deeply felt, primal, not intellectual. Elizabeth I reigned for 44 years. She died on March 24, 1603, at the age of 69, the last of the Tudor monarchs. She never named her successor until she was dying, and even then she indicated it only through a gesture. The crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. Her legacy is complex, as all great reigns are. The Elizabethan era was golden in its culture and literature. It was also an era of poverty, religious persecution, colonial exploitation, and court intrigue that destroyed lives. England's rise as a naval and colonial power during her reign would have consequences for the entire world that lasted for centuries. What I want to take from her story, for you today, is simpler than her political legacy. She was declared illegitimate at the age of 2. Her mother was executed. She was threatened, imprisoned, watched, and suspected for most of her childhood and early adulthood. She had every reason to become bitter, fearful, or reckless. Instead, she became extraordinary. She learned. She developed patience and shrewdness and strength under conditions that would have broken almost anyone. She did not simply survive. She became one of the most powerful figures of her era, in a world that had almost no place for powerful women. Adversity, a state of serious difficulty or misfortune. What Elizabeth I's story tells us about adversity is not that it makes us stronger automatically, but that it can, if we are willing to learn from it rather than be destroyed by it. You are learning English. Perhaps there are days when it feels impossible, when the grammar won't come, when you mishear a word, when you feel far from the goal. Those are the Tower of London moments. Sit in them. Don't give up. The throne is further down the road. If Elizabeth I's extraordinary life gave you something today, courage or wonder, or simply a great story, please give this video a like and subscribe to Streamline English. And tell me in the comments, which woman in history do you most admire? Her story might be the next one I tell. Until next time, my friend, be brave and have a beautiful day.